He was ready to die, but she saved him. What does she want? They threw him down like a piece of trash. Kael's body jerked as the metal hull of the transport ship opened above him. A cruel, cold wind howled, the air thick with the stench of burnt ozone. The ground beneath him was a blur of swirling metal and dust, a desolate landscape of scorched earth and twisted debris. He was falling fast, and the impact would be the end. He had no doubt. No hope. No fight left in him. Variones was a planet known for one thing: it was where they sent the broken. The ones who were discarded. Its surface was a barren wasteland, a place for outcasts and criminals to perish without anyone giving a damn. He had been one of them, a soldier turned rogue, marked by the same brutal system that now condemned him to this forsaken hell. His limbs felt like lead, the weight of failure pulling him down. The roar of the wind grew louder in his ears as the ground neared. And then, the ground slammed into him. The impact shattered his ribs, sending waves of pain through his body. Blood dripped from his nose, mixing with the sand and ash beneath him. He tried to move, but his muscles refused to obey. His vision blurred as his head throbbed. For a moment, there was nothing but the emptiness, the harsh reality of death settling in. He could feel it creeping up his spine, inching closer with every shallow breath. A growl ripped through the air. Kael's head snapped up just in time to see the shadow of something massive looming over him. Its eyes gleamed with a deadly hunger, and its form was monstrous, a grotesque blend of insect and reptile. It was a Maegrax, a creature of Variones' mutated depths, capable of tearing a man apart with a single swipe of its claws. It was there to finish what the drop had started. He didn't even try to crawl away. His chest heaved with broken breaths as the Maegrax lunged forward, its jagged teeth snapping with inhuman speed. Kael closed his eyes. This was it. There was no escaping the end. Then, a blur of movement. A streak of silver flashed through the air, cutting through the Maegrax's throat with surgical precision. The creature recoiled, screeching in agony as blood sprayed from its wound. In an instant, its body crumpled to the ground, lifeless, its monstrous form collapsing into the dust. Kael's eyes flickered open, disbelief and confusion mingling in his dazed mind. Standing above him, a woman. She was tall and lean, her dark skin contrasting sharply with the silver armor she wore. Her eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the scene before landing on him. She didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, she turned her back to him, preparing to leave. But then, she paused. Her gaze shifted, settling on a deep scar across Kael's left arm. It was a mark he'd carried for years, the result of a mission gone wrong, an operation that had led to the massacre of an entire village. A village that had once been her home. The mark, old but unmistakable, was a symbol of his past. A reminder of who he had been, and what he had done. For a long moment, she stood there, unmoving, before her lips curled into a slight sneer. Her hand went to the hilt of her weapon, the metal of the blade reflecting the harsh sunlight as she carefully considered her next move. Kael could barely lift his head, his body too broken to care. He was nothing now, no soldier, no man. Just a shell. His eyes fluttered shut again, the weight of exhaustion finally overtaking him. There was no reason to fight anymore. He had given up. Varianese was where people like him came to die. But then, just before she turned away, she spoke. "Why aren't you fighting?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. "You have nothing left to lose, or are you waiting for death to take you?" Her words cut through the fog in Kael's mind. They were sharp, pointed, and for the first time in a long while, they made him feel something. Something he couldn't quite grasp. The woman didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, her form fading into the haze of the desert. Kael's mind swirled with questions, but his body refused to respond. Why hadn't he fought? What had he been waiting for? Perhaps she was right. Perhaps he had been waiting for death all along. But that question would have to wait. Kael's body throbbed with pain as he was dragged across the jagged desert floor, his wounds left to bleed into the parched earth. His vision swam in and out of focus, the world spinning as he fought to stay conscious. He had no strength to fight back, no will to do anything but let his body be pulled along. Each ragged breath felt like a dagger in his chest, each movement a reminder of the brutality of the drop. The wind was hot, the air thick with the acrid taste of metal and dust, the sky above an endless stretch of bruised orange. When they reached the base, Kael's legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed to the ground with a grunt. The cold stone of the abandoned mining station cut into his skin, the metallic scent of rust mixing with the blood that stained his clothes. He could barely make out the outline of the woman who had saved him, Lyra. She moved like a shadow, silent and swift, pulling him to his feet with a strength that belied her slender frame. Without a word, she shoved him into a corner of the decrepit structure, where the remnants of old equipment lay forgotten, abandoned by those who had once worked here. The place smelled of mildew and decay, the walls lined with cracks and faded markings. A place once alive with activity now lay in ruins, much like Kael himself. She tied his wrists to a rusted pipe with rough, tight knots. Kael grunted in pain, but he didn't resist. He couldn't. The agony in his chest was too much. His body trembled from the effort of staying upright. He could feel the blood from his wounds trickling down, staining his tattered uniform, but he didn't care. He felt as though his body was no longer his own, that he had become a mere shell, a thing to be discarded. Lyra stepped back, her dark eyes scanning him with a cold detachment. She didn't speak. Her gaze was steady, focused, as if she was waiting something that Kael could not quite understand. He swallowed hard, trying to focus on her, but his vision blurred again, the pain clouding his thoughts. Then, the question came. "Do you remember Shaen'Vael?" Her voice was flat, like the wind that swept through the empty halls of the base, unfeeling, indifferent. But there was something behind it. A weight. A bitterness. Kael blinked, trying to make sense of the question. Shaen'Vael. The name hit him like a freight train, crashing through his foggy mind. Shaen'Vael. The village. The massacre. He had been there, part of the operation, just another soldier following orders. He had been a cog in the machine, a weapon to be used, to carry out what had been dictated to him. He had never thought about the consequences, never thought about the people who had lived there, about the lives that had been torn apart. It was a blur, a memory now tainted with the knowledge of what had happened. What he had done. What his unit had done. His throat tightened as the images flooded back, the cries of the innocent, the burning homes, the children running, the blood staining the earth. He had been there, in the midst of it, pulling the trigger, never questioning, never stopping. He had done his duty, like any soldier. But now, in the silence of that forsaken place, those memories felt like lead in his chest. I was there, Kael rasped, his voice hoarse and broken. But I didn't know. I didn't know what was happening. Lyra's eyes narrowed. She took a step closer, her gaze never leaving him. The tension in the room thickened, the silence pressing down on him like a weight. Kael could feel her anger, but there was something else too, something colder, more calculating. You didn't know? She asked, her tone even, but there was a sharpness to it. You didn't know what you were doing? Kael shook his head weakly. No. We were given orders. We just followed them. I didn't. His words faltered as his mind struggled to make sense of it all. I didn't know the cost. Lyra's expression softened just slightly, but it was enough to make Kael's chest tighten with guilt. She crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes still fixed on him, studying him as if she could see every layer of his soul laid bare. Do you think that makes it better? She asked quietly. Her voice was colder now, more distant. Do you think that makes it okay? You didn't know. You didn't know that you were slaughtering innocent people. The words cut through him like knives. He felt the weight of them sink deep into his heart, twisting with a pain that he had long buried. He wanted to scream, to defend himself, but the truth was there, sitting heavy in his chest. He had been a tool, a weapon. Nothing more. I didn't, he swallowed, his throat dry. I didn't think about them. I was just following orders. Lyra studied him for a long moment, her gaze piercing, like she was searching for something in him. Kael could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the silence between them stretching on for what felt like an eternity. She had every right to kill him. She had every reason to take revenge for her people. But she didn't. She didn't move to strike him, didn't raise her weapon. Instead, she sighed, a sound so soft that Kael almost didn't hear it. I should kill you, she muttered, almost to herself. I should end it right now. Kael's breath hitched. His whole body tensed, his heart racing. But Lyra didn't move. She didn't pull the trigger. She didn't raise her blade. Instead, she knelt beside him, her movements slow and deliberate. The silence returned, broken only by the sound of her breathing. Kael didn't know what to expect, but what came next surprised him. With no word, Lyra reached into her pack, pulled out a small vial, and began to clean the wounds on his chest. The sting of the antiseptic was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the pain in his soul. As she worked in silence, Kael felt the weight of her presence, the weight of her anger, her grief, and yet, there was something else there too. Something that stopped her from ending him. The silence stretched on. The moment the signal flared, they were already surrounded. The base, once silent and abandoned, now buzzed with the sharp hum of heat signatures, a beacon in the dead of the desert. Lyra's eyes flicked to the small monitor in her hand, the red dots multiplying across the screen. Bravos. A swarm of them. Lower-level creatures, but relentless, fast, and vicious. They had tracked the heat signature of the old mining base, tracked it all the way to their hiding place. Kael's chest tightened as he struggled to push himself to his feet. His limbs were stiff, his body still weak from the beating it had taken, but his instincts kicked in. He grabbed the closest weapon, a jagged survival knife that lay on the ground next to him, and staggered forward, his blood still staining the floor beneath him. Lyra didn't hesitate. She was already on her feet, moving with a fluid grace that Kael envied, her weapon ready and her eyes sharp. Without a word, she motioned for him to follow. The Revos were closing in. He could hear their clicking, growling, echoing through the base. They moved like shadows, hunched and fast, a blur of movement that could overwhelm a man in seconds. "Get ready," Lyra said, her voice calm but low, like she was speaking to herself more than to him. The first Revos lunged, its jaws snapping, and Kael's blade met its flesh with a sickening crunch. He felt the heat of the creature's blood splash against his skin, the weight of its body slamming into his as it died. But there were more. So many more. Lyra was already cutting through the next one with clean, swift strikes, her blade singing through the air with deadly precision. Kael fought beside her, his movements uncoordinated, still too weak, but the desperation surged through him. His heart hammered in his chest, his breath sharp and ragged, as the Revos kept coming. They fought side by side, a blur of motion in the dim light of the base. Each slash, each kill, sent a spike of adrenaline through Kael's body, drowning out the pain in his ribs, the dizziness in his head. There was no time to think. There was only the fight. The Revos didn't stop. They kept coming, their screeches rising in the air as they overwhelmed the space, their claws scrabbling against the metal floors. Kael barely managed to hold his ground, his vision swimming as he dodged another strike, narrowly avoiding the claws that would have torn through his throat. Lyra was there, always a step ahead. Her eyes never left her targets, her movements precise and deadly, but Kael could see the tension in her face. She was calculating, assessing, making decisions on the fly. And then, she looked at him, her expression flickering for a moment. Was it concern? They were cornered. There was nowhere left to run. The Revos had them boxed in, and the walls of the base offered no escape. Kael's chest burned with each breath, his vision blurring as the dizziness grew. He was too weak for this. He had nothing left to give. And then, just as it seemed like they were finished, Lyra's eyes locked onto something behind the swarm. A narrow tunnel, a passageway hidden in the back of the base. She didn't say anything. She just moved, her legs propelling her forward with incredible speed. She grabbed Kael's arm, yanking him along with her, and together they dashed toward the tunnel. The Revos were close, too close, but they made it. Lyra slammed her body against the entrance, just managing to squeeze through, pulling Kael behind her. They stumbled through the narrow passage, their bodies pressed together as they fought to escape. The tunnel opened up into a wide, dark cavern, the air thick with the scent of ozone and plasma. Kael's body screamed in protest as they moved deeper into the cave, but Lyra didn't stop. She led him through the twisting passageways, her movements fluid, like she had been here before. They reached a small, sheltered alcove within minutes. The glow of the plasma energy in the walls provided the only light, casting a dim, eerie glow across the rocky interior. Kael collapsed against the stone, gasping for breath. His body was covered in blood, his wounds still fresh and painful. But they had escaped. For now. Lyra stood in the entrance, her back to him, her silhouette tense as she listened for any signs of pursuit. The revolves were slower in the plasma cave, the unstable energy interfering with their natural tracking abilities. But they wouldn't stop. They would never stop. Kael closed his eyes, resting his head against the cool stone. He was alive. For now. But the question burned in his mind, the one that he had yet to ask. Why did you save me? His voice was rough, barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything he couldn't say. Lyra's back stiffened at the question, her fingers tightening around the hilt of her blade. She didn't turn to face him, but her silence was louder than any answer she could give. Why not just let me die? He pressed, pushing himself up with a grunt, the pain in his body forgotten for a moment as he stared at her. You had every reason to kill me. After what I did, after what I helped do. Her shoulders tensed, and Kael saw her jaw clench. She was avoiding his gaze, her eyes fixed on the distant darkness of the cave. I don't know, she said finally, her voice quieter than before, like she was speaking to herself. Maybe I should have. But I didn't. Maybe I didn't want this to end so quickly. Kael frowned, confused by her words. She didn't want it to end? Did she mean him, or something else? He didn't understand. There was no logic to it. She glanced at him, her eyes flicking over him before turning away again. I hate you, she muttered, almost too softly for him to hear. But I don't want to end this with your blood on my hands. The words hit him harder than anything else. He had expected hatred, anger, perhaps even a desire for revenge, but this was different. And for the first time, Kael found himself smiling. A small, bitter thing, but it was a smile nonetheless. The situation was absurd. They had just fought for their lives, and here they were, sitting in an abandoned cave, bleeding and battered, and yet. Funny, he whispered, his voice hoarse, we're both alive. Lyra turned to look at him then, her gaze lingering for a moment before she quickly looked away. For a fleeting second, Kael saw something in her eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't anger or disdain. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was something else. But it was there, and it made his heart skip a beat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. And then, without another word, Lyra turned her back to him once more, staring into the darkness. But Kael, despite everything, couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. Something he couldn't yet understand. The storm had come out of nowhere, a violent wave of ion energy that raged through the plasma cave, closing off every possible exit. For 2 days, they were trapped, with only the faint hum of the charged walls to remind them of the outside world. The storm had disrupted any signals, and there was no escape, no way out except to wait. Inside the cave, the air was thick with the scent of ozone, the dim glow from the plasma walls casting eerie shadows across their makeshift shelter. Kael and Lyra had settled in a small alcove deep within the cave, their bodies pressed against the cold rock, finding some small comfort in each other's presence. There was nothing but time now. Their food supply had run out on the first night, and the water was quickly dwindling. The silence between them was oppressive, broken only by the sounds of their ragged breathing. At times, they exchanged fleeting glances, but neither spoke, both wrapped in their own thoughts, their own fears. Finally, on the second day, the tension reached its breaking point. Kael, still recovering from his injuries, took the last of the water, drinking it slowly, savoring the tiny droplets that slid down his parched throat. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and sat back against the stone, his eyes searching the darkness. Lyra was sitting opposite him, her sharp eyes never leaving him, her posture as rigid as ever. Her fingers drummed lightly on the hilt of her blade, the only sign of her restlessness. The storm had not abated, and the stillness inside the cave felt unnatural, like a pressure building in the air, waiting to snap. Kael cleared his throat, his voice hoarse, raw from lack of use. "We need to talk," he said quietly, breaking the silence. Lyra didn't respond immediately. Her gaze flickered to him, but her face remained impassive. She didn't want to hear it. He could see it in the way her jaw tightened, in the way her hand gripped the dagger. But Kael was determined. The weight of the silence between them had become unbearable. "Why did you save me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's eyes narrowed, but she didn't reply. Her gaze moved away from him, focusing on the shifting shadows in the corner of the cave. I'm not the man you think I am," Kael continued, his voice thick with regret. "I didn't come here willingly. I was betrayed. I didn't deserve to be left for dead." Lyra's lips parted slightly, as if she was going to say something, but then her eyes dropped to the ground. She didn't speak for a long while, and when she did, her voice was low, cold. "Betrayed? Everyone here is betrayed. It's what we all have in common." Kael swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. "I was just following orders. I didn't have a choice. But when I saw what they wanted me to do, what they were asking me to do, I couldn't. I refused to burn down that village. I couldn't kill innocent people. They called me a traitor." Lyra's eyes flickered toward him, just for a second, and then she looked away again. Her fingers tightened on the edge of her blade. "You're a soldier. You do what you're told," she said, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "I get it. But it doesn't make you innocent." Kael felt the sting of her words, but he couldn't argue. He had been a soldier, a machine for the Empire, nothing more. His hands were stained with the blood of innocence, and he had never questioned the orders. Until that day. The day he had refused. "I'm not innocent," he said quietly. "I never was. But I didn't deserve to be left to die. I didn't deserve this." Lyra remained silent for a long moment, her eyes distant, her thoughts lost in some far-off place. The cave felt colder somehow, the air heavier, as if her words had sucked all the warmth from the room. "And you?" Kael asked after a while, his voice barely audible. "Why are you here, Lyra? Why are you fighting? What happened to you?" She was silent again. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it might suffocate him. He could see her chest rising and falling in steady breaths, and her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her dagger. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lyra spoke. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, like a knife cutting through the dark. My parents died. The same way you killed all those people. They were civilians, harmless. But the Empire burned them alive. I watched them die. I was a child. And I couldn't do anything to stop it. Her words cut through Kael like a blade, and he recoiled slightly, feeling the weight of her pain. Her eyes never met his as she spoke, as if she couldn't bear to see the pity in his gaze. I don't cry for them, she added, her voice empty. I don't need to. The rage is enough. And now I fight. I kill. It's all I know. It's all I have left. Kael felt a pang of guilt twist in his gut. He wanted to say something, but there were no words that could make this better. He had been part of the system that had destroyed everything she loved, everything she was. And now, here they were, trapped together in this cave, sharing the silence of their broken lives. But, you still saved me, Kael whispered, almost to himself. Why? Lyra was still for a long time, her gaze now fixed on the shadows in the distance. Kael thought she might never answer, but then, finally, she spoke. I don't know, she said, her voice quiet, almost thoughtful. Maybe I saw something in you. Maybe I saw someone who was more than just a soldier. Maybe I just didn't want to see another dead body. Maybe. She trailed off, her voice fading into the silence. Kael felt the weight of her words, the unsaid things hanging in the air between them. She placed her dagger on the ground beside her, slowly, deliberately. And as Kael lay back against the stone, exhausted, his body aching from the wounds he had yet to fully heal, he watched her for a long moment. As sleep finally took him, he heard her whisper softly, almost too softly to hear. Tomorrow. I'll decide. The first rays of the sun broke through the plasma storm's remnants, casting long, jagged shadows across the cavern. Lyra stood up quietly, her movements fluid, but there was an underlying tension in her every step. She looked down at Kael, his body curled in a shallow sleep, his wounds from their escape still fresh. He had barely spoken since the storm passed, lost in the isolation of his thoughts. But Lyra knew it was time to move. She shook him lightly, her voice low but firm. Wake up, Kael. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he just stared at her, dazed and confused, the remnants of the dream world still clinging to him. His lips parted to say something, but Lyra cut him off. I didn't kill you, she said coldly, though the words didn't carry their usual edge. But you're going to live. You have to see what you destroyed. Kael blinked, slowly pushing himself up, wincing at the pain from his still healing body. The words hit him harder than they should have. He wasn't sure what he expected from her, but hearing it put so bluntly made him feel smaller, weaker, like a broken thing that hadn't earned the right to exist. He didn't argue. He just nodded, not trusting his voice. With a grunt, Lyra turned and gathered what little gear they had left, strapping the pack to her back and checking her weapons. We move at first light, she muttered. Get ready. The landscape beyond the cave had transformed since the storm had passed. The air felt oppressive, thick with the residue of the charged storm. The ground was still hot from the plasma poles, the metallic sands gleaming under the sun like the remnants of a fire long gone cold. It was a barren wasteland, a world of ash and ruin. As they walked through the desolation, Lyra didn't speak much. She led the way with the sharp precision of someone who had grown accustomed to navigating the ruins of her past. Kael followed behind, limping slightly, but there was no question now that he was moving on instinct. He wasn't going to die today. Not if he could help it. The journey took hours, the oppressive silence between them only broken by the occasional crackling of the sand underfoot or the distant howl of some unseen creature. It wasn't long before the horizon shifted, revealing the jagged remnants of something once whole, Shaen'Vael. Kael stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. The village, once vibrant, full of life, was no more than a patch of smoldering ash now, the charred remains of houses scattered like broken toys. The smoke still lingered in the air, and the scent of burned earth clung to the wind. He could see the faint outline of stone structures, half buried in the sand, the faintest traces of where homes had once stood. Lyra was silent beside him, her face unreadable. She was looking at the same ruins, but her eyes were focused on something beyond what Kael could see. Something deeper. They stood there for a long time, the weight of the ruins pressing on them both. But it was Lyra who finally spoke, her voice distant, cold. "This is where they lived. Where they died." Kael swallowed, his throat tight. His mind raced, the memories flooding back, but he couldn't make sense of them. He remembered the orders. He remembered the violence. But here, in front of this place, it felt like something else entirely. Something was breaking inside him. He turned to Lyra, his voice rough. I didn't know. I never saw." Before he could finish, a sharp noise cut through the air, followed by the unmistakable thud of boots hitting the sand. A group of mercenaries, heavily armed, emerged from the ruins. They were quick, efficient hunters, not soldiers. They surrounded them in seconds, guns aimed, their movements precise. Lyra's hand moved to her weapon in a flash, but she didn't fire immediately. Instead, she stood her ground, her eyes narrowing as she sized up the group. Kael's heart raced in his chest. His body still ached, his limbs felt weak, but he couldn't just stand there. He grabbed for his knife, his fingers trembling. The mercenaries weren't interested in talking. They came for them with a fury, their guns barking out viciously. Lyra dove to the side, rolling behind a chunk of stone, her blade flashing in the dim light. Kael followed suit, though his body protested, every step dragging him further into pain. It was chaos. The mercenaries moved like a swarm, but Lyra was a force, quick, precise, a predator in her own right. She cut through them with ruthless efficiency. Kael, for his part, found himself fighting purely on instinct, his body moving despite the protests of his wounds. He wasn't as fast as he once was, but his desperation made him dangerous. He knew he couldn't afford to lose. Not now. When the last of the mercenaries fell, the ground was littered with bodies. The air was thick with smoke and a sharp scent of blood. Kael collapsed to the ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body screaming in protest. His vision blurred at the edges. Lyra stood over him, breathing heavily but unaffected, her eyes scanning the area for any more threats. Then, Without a word, she knelt beside him, her hands moving quickly to tend to his injuries. Kael could barely comprehend what was happening. His limbs felt like lead, his body soaked in sweat and blood. And yet, he found himself staring at Lyra, her cold expression unchanging as she worked. There was no malice in her eyes, no anger. Only something he couldn't quite place. "I'm not finished with this," Lyra said quietly, her voice cutting through the haze of pain in Kael's head. "But you don't die yet." Kael opened his mouth to speak, but his throat felt tight, his words lost. Instead, he looked at her, trying to understand. Lyra's gaze softened for just a moment, and he could see it the flicker of doubt. Her fingers trembled slightly as she finished tying off his wound. She didn't kill him. She could have. She should have. "Why did you save me?" Kael whispered, his voice barely audible. Lyra paused, her eyes meeting his, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. "Maybe," she said quietly, her voice barely more than a breath, "because I wanted to see if you could still change."